style educators. And its focus is on building an alliance of students, parents, and community. And it says, one of their statements is, the teacher's working condition or the student's learning condition. So there's an interconnection. I was going to say that. I'm a victim of too many papers sometimes. The consumerization of education will be Jonathan's presentation. Over the past 20 years, the education reform movement has changed how most parents, students, and teachers have viewed education. Instead of being seen as a monolithic system, we now hear the phrase school choice, so that most people now view schools as different service providers competing for their business. Jonathan Lessuck was born and raised in New York City. He's a product of the NYC public schools. He's taught chemistry and physics for 29 years in public high schools in the Bronx and Manhattan. Currently, he works at Ellis Prep Academy on the JFK campus. Ellis Prep is part of the international network of schools and serves recently immigrated students who are over age upon their arrival in the United States. During his career, he served as union delegate for his school to the UFT Delegate Assembly and as a chapter leader. He has worked with various groups within the union and is currently a member of the movement of rank and file educators. Jonathan?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm a little nervous. It's funny when you teach and you're in front of a class all the time, you think that teachers don't get nervous when they stand up to speak, but when it's not your students and it's another audience, it can be a little nerve-wracking. So a little bit about myself. As you heard, I've been teaching for 29 years in New York City. I'm also born and raised in New York City. I attended PS 65 in Manhattan, Junior High School 54, so we have a connection there. And Brooklyn Technical High School.
We have another connection.
And graduated from CCNY in 1984. 1984, my goodness. And started teaching right away. And just to give you a little bit of where I've taught, because I think it shows a little bit of kind of my understanding of why things have changed in New York City. I started teaching at John F. Kennedy High School. I taught at Lehman High School, Evander Childs High School, James Monroe High School, back to John F. Kennedy High School. And then I kind of changed, all of those were large schools. And then I kind of changed gears. From John F. Kennedy High School, I started teaching at New York City Museum School, which was a small program in Chelsea District. I taught there. I then went to a school called Pan American International High School, which was an international high school at the Monroe campus. And now I'm back on the JFK building for the third time at Ellis Preparatory Academy. Ellis Preparatory Academy and also Pan American are part of the International Schools Network. International schools work with students who are recently immigrated. They've all been in the country less than 4 years. They're all English language learners. And at our school at Ellis Prep, they're all at least 16 years old when they come into the 9th grade. And I'll get back to that because I think where I am now is an important piece of evidence for what I'm saying. My theme is consumerization of education. And I think that to illustrate it a little bit, I want to talk about two places that I've taught. I taught at James Monroe. I started teaching at James Monroe High School in 1987. In 1987, James Monroe High School had about 1,700 students. It had a wide range of students. We had honors classes, we had AP classes. We also had GED program and special ed and bilingual ed. And it was a huge range of students at the school who achieved many different things. Most of our graduates went to college. We even had some graduates who went to Ivy League schools. By 1993, just 6 years later, when James Monroe took in its last 9th grade class, 80% of the incoming students were reading below grade level. The school had 2,500 students, 150% of capacity. And at that point, we were labeled a failing school. Well, and the school was phased out. That wasn't an accident. James Monroe wasn't closed, didn't end up in that situation by accident. But it did end up, it was actually a very purposeful thing. What happened in the Bronx at that time was that all of the other high schools in the Central and South Bronx were capped. That meant that they had limits to the number of students that they could take in. And the only school that was not capped at that time was James Monroe High School. So that left the other high schools in a position where they could pick and choose students that they wanted. And James Monroe was left with the students that weren't chosen in other programs. Also at that time was the start of the small school movement in New York City. And they also were spending a lot of time. They also had the ability to pick and choose students into magnet programs around the city. So what happened at James Monroe High School is that James Monroe became the school of last resort for students who couldn't get into other programs. And also because it wasn't capped, it became a huge school, operating from 0 period to 10th period. And it just was a situation that was set up to fail by, at the time, Board of Education. And it did, unfortunately. It was declared a failing school, and it was closed. The thing is that that model of closing a large high school has been repeated over and over in the last 20 years. The list in the Bronx includes Morris High School, Stevenson, Evander Childs, Columbus, Grace Dodge, Harry Truman, Walton, Alfred E. Smith, John F. Kennedy, and now Clinton High School has been taxed to turnaround. There are no more large neighborhood schools in the Bronx once Clinton closes. Every school in the Bronx will be a small school. And this has been a purposeful thing, I feel. And I'll get to why in a minute. When I traveled around a bit, I ended up at New York City Museum School, which was actually also a very interesting place. I really enjoyed it. It was a very small school. It was a 6 through 12 school that had 2 classes on a grade. So we had about 300 students, grades 6 through 12. But it was set up by its founders as a heterogeneous school. That is, it took in students regardless of their grades on standardized tests. In fact, it purposefully looked for students with a wide range of grades and from a wide range of backgrounds, because the feeling of the founders and the founding teachers was that made for a better education. Having students with a lot of different experiences and a lot of different backgrounds and working with those students and getting students to work together made for a much stronger education. It was a project-based school that actually, we took our students out to museums twice a week. That's why it was called the museum school. They did projects at the museums, were classrooms for us. And we had partnerships with 5 museums around the city. And our students really learned a lot there. But when Race to the Top came in and the new regime started looking at school grades and giving schools grades, so not just looking at test grades, but actually giving schools grades based on those tests, District 2 decided they wanted a different kind of program. They wanted a talented and gifted program. And so they changed everything in the school. They got rid of the middle school. They expanded the high school to 4 classes on the grade. They cut back the amount of time that students were in the museums and made test prep much stronger. And that's when I decided to leave that school, because it was not what I had signed on for. When I left that school, I came up to Pan American International High School in the Bronx, and I'd chosen that school to apply to for a reason. When I was at James Monroe High School, we did a lot of work in the science department with the bilingual students. And that kind of came about because one year, a friend of mine and I were looking at the graduation list, and we realized that there were, of the top 10 students in the school graduating, including the valedictorian, only 2 had taken chemistry and physics. The reason for that was that the other 8 were bilingual students, that at the time in New York City, the graduation requirement was 9th grade science, which they could take as in a bilingual setting, and biology, which they could take in a bilingual setting. And that was the requirement for graduation for science. So the top bilingual students weren't coming to take chemistry and physics for a number of reasons. They were scared, it was in English, it was a harder course. And so a friend of mine who was a physics teacher and I was teaching chemistry at that time, sat down with the bilingual coordinator at the school and we said, look, we're going to make a safe environment. We want to bring your kids, give them more exposure to the sciences. And we did, and we started bringing more and more of the bilingual kids into taking chemistry and physics and English. And we had a very large success rate with that. When they closed James Monroe High School, one of the concerns was that there would be no place for bilingual students to go. As they closed larger and larger high schools, the thing about small high schools is that they can't offer the kind of services to a wide swath of students. When you only have 400 students in your school, if 8 of them are bilingual, you can't make a bilingual class, it's too expensive. If 4 of them are special ed, you can't make a special ed class, it's too expensive. At the other end, if 10 of them are honors students, you can't make an AP class, it's too expensive. So when Monroe closed, that was a concern that was raised, and we all said, oh no, people will find a way to do this. I would say they haven't found a good way. Except that I will say that the internationals are trying. They're working with bilingual students. So when I came to Pan American, when I was looking for a new school, I looked at the international schools for that reason, because I felt that this was a problem in the Bronx that internationals were trying to develop. But it still didn't deal with the bigger problem. And that's the problem of how do we deal with larger issues, and what has been the effect of closing large high schools and closing and replacing them with these small schools. To me, part of the issue, the insidiousness of this, and this is coming from both Democratic and Republican politicians, is the use of language. They use terms like student rights, students first, high standards, qualified teachers, quality schools, and most importantly, school choice. And what it's done is it's set up a situation where if you choose your school, then you don't really, or in the eyes of the Department of Education, shouldn't really care about what's happening in other schools. As long as your school's okay, as long as your child is in a good school, it doesn't matter what's happening in other places. And therefore you don't or shouldn't care about what's happening to other children. Now I think that this has happened for several reasons. One is that it's weakened the union. UFT, which has gone along with all of these things, has allowed changes in contract on a school-by-school basis, has allowed teachers are more and more pressured to work outside of the contract. But it's also broken up schools where there were large groups of teachers and students and parents. So at John F. Kennedy High School, when I left there were over 300 teachers in the union chapter. There were 5,000 students and their parents. And when things happened in that school or in that community, you could pretty much count that there would be somewhat of a large response to it by both the teachers and the students and their parents. That doesn't happen in small schools. Small schools have staffs of 20. Small schools have 400 kids. Even if there are 8 schools in a building, which there are right now at the John F. Kennedy campus, 8 schools. 8 schools at John F. Kennedy, yeah, including 2 charter schools. So that's one thing, is that it makes it harder if you want to organize around issues in the schools. It's much harder to do that when you have a bunch of small schools. It also shifts focus away from systemic issues. Instead of seeing broad problems with reading programs, instead of seeing broad problems with attendance issues, with education, if you're just concentrated on your school, and if the general philosophy is, well, if that school's not working, you can always find another one for your kid, or as a teacher, if you're not happy there, you can find another school to work at, then problems are no longer seen as systemic. And nobody is arguing about the systemic issues that still exist in our system. And finally, I think that it also allows privatization to come in. Schools are much more dependent on money from outside organizations. Because since they don't have the scale of students and not working with 1,500 or 2,000 students, then they need extra money to provide all the things that students want or need. So it also puts charter schools on the same basis as regular schools, because it's just another small school, it's just another choice. And I'm going to kind of wrap up. I know I'm not. What this has allowed, and where this kind of comes from nationally, is from Race to the Top, most recently. Race to the Top has added more testing in schools. If you have a child or a grandchild who's in public school now, you notice they just finished the second week of 3 days in each week of testing, English and then math. Schools are evaluated on their test scores above all else. And teachers are going to be evaluated based on something called value added. And value added, which all of the studies have shown is junk science. It basically says, these are the students we gave you, this is where they should have gotten, according to our estimate, and if they didn't get all the way up to there, they only got to here, you were an ineffective teacher. Well, the reality is that all the value-added formulas have been shown not to really show what students are or are not learning, and that they all use tests as their guidelines. So it makes a basic assumption that testing students is the right way to evaluate what they've learned, and that changes in test scores are the right way to evaluate how well a teacher has performed in the classroom. The other thing that's happening, and this is something that President Obama spoke about in his first State of the Union address, is that he's looking to change education in the United States to something that's a more European system. What he has proposed, and it's kind of been quieted down, but it's still out there in the proposals that he and Arne Duncan have put forward, is to make 10th grade kind of a gateway year. To give students in 10th grade, to put them into either a college-bound program or a CTE, or a technology-bound program. And that is something that would be a major change and to the education system. One of the effects of this, just one of the effects, is that New York City now is the 3rd most segregated city in terms of schools. Chicago's number 1, Dallas is number 2, and New York City public schools are the 3rd most segregated city in the country. Black and Latino students attend schools with twice the number of low-income students. And more than 50% of New York City schools have student populations that are over 90% Black and Hispanic. I'm sorry. As I said, this is where I kind of get messed up because I don't want to give you a lot of statistics. My experience in teaching in New York City, I would not have traded for anything in the world. I have loved 30 years of teaching in New York City. But I have a lot of trouble at this point in time suggesting that anybody that I know that's young go into teaching in New York City. Because education is changing in New York, and it's not changing for the better. And it's hard sometimes to talk about, it's hard to deal with. And I just want to kind of close, and one of the things that I learned as a teacher is not to talk for too long. So, and to make it more, really kind of to have more of a discussion and to ask for your questions, and I think I can talk a little bit better with that. But this is, what I did want to talk about a little bit at the end was what would be the ethical response to this happening? What's the response that we can do? And to me, that's a matter of what we do, not just once you hear what I have to say, but once we leave here. There are a lot of organizations, a lot of movements that are coming up to deal with different issues that people feel are important. In the UFT, I'm a member of the Movement of Rank and File Educators, which is a caucus that has run against U.S. Unity Leadership, which is leadership that currently runs the union. And actually, we won 40% of the vote in the high schools in the union elections last week, because I think high school teachers are much more affected or see a lot more of the problems than some middle school and elementary school teachers do. But our caucus is, among other things, a social justice caucus. That is, we look beyond just contractual issues and look at how things are affecting our students and their parents. There are other names that, if you're interested in doing things, other people that are organizing things. Change the Stakes is a group that's being organized by a woman named Susan Ohanian on testing. Diane Ravitch, who 15 years ago was calling for small schools, has, now that they've been in place, seen the effect of them and has totally changed her opinion on small schools. There are organizations like Parent Voice New York and Parents Across America, all of which are trying to influence the conversation on education in a way that is more appropriate and supportive of students in their lives, and away from the constant amount of testing and evaluation that's being done. And so consumerization of education. Once we look at education as a product, as something to be sold or traded, then it's no longer a systemic problem. It's now just one more thing that we can choose among. And it's brought a lot of issues, a lot of problems to education in New York City and in this country. And so that's my presentation. And I just, right now, if there are questions, yes.
A question for you personally. How has your transferring to so many schools affected you? I'm a retired high school teacher, New York City, and I had 25 years at Seward Park High School, which was closed and broken up into 4 schools, which I thought was a lot at the time. But I mean, there was a certain loyalty to the school and interaction, and also we had a whole floor. We had 5,000 students at one point with an annex. We had a whole floor of special ed, and we had bilingual. We had 8, 10 languages at its heyday, and programs that were unbelievable. How can you have, in a small school, you can't have these things just by the very nature. how did it affect you of transferring from one to another, to another, to another, all over?
Well, so I would say that there are three effects. One is that the old days of your students come back to visit you, or you have your students' children, you have a reputation, you've been in the school for forever. That doesn't happen in New York City anymore. In order to keep track of with my old students, I have to maintain a presence on Facebook. Because that's where my students are, and it's the only way that they can find me. Second is that, again, because education is a product now, teachers move a lot. I've moved a lot, and I know teachers with half the amount of time in the system that I have who have moved as much as I have. Because they're looking for the right place, or they're looking for a better position. And so, because schools are small, there aren't, you don't have the kind of support. So if you want to become a support person, you may have to go someplace else, to another school, because your school has its one support person. So that you don't get that kind of long-term working together of staff that you used to get. The third was lack of contact with students, lack of contact. I think that it also affects the smaller schools. You're right, can't give those kind of services. And that makes things harder. How it's affected me is it's harder to have friends for a long period of time because you lose track. Even if you try and stay in touch, everybody gets lives that are different and busier.
Do you notice that there's a trend to go back to a little bit larger school because of some of the things that are missing in these mini schools?
No, there's no trend to that in New York City. The trend is still to continue making small schools. 600 is about the largest school that they'll create now. Yes?
I'm also a retired UFT teacher. If I was teaching, I would have continued doing it. But I was lucky enough to be old enough when all this started that I could retire. And I feel like, quite frankly, the system lost out on a lot. But my question is, we know that these tests measure discrete skills. What has happened to creativity and humanism within the Board of Education as something taught?
Well, a lot of schools don't offer art anymore, don't offer music. A lot of schools, especially in the elementary and middle schools, spend a tremendous amount of time on test prep because that's how they're going to be graded. And so that is no longer part of it. In fact, even to the point where some schools don't even offer or cutting back on the amount of science and social studies that they're offering because reading and math is what the kids are going to be tested on.
But in terms of evaluating teachers, where does creativity fall into this universe of evaluation?
It doesn't. It doesn't. I'm sorry. One there and then one here. And then. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to ask you as a member of MORE, the MORE caucus, do you have an opinion as to whether the union has had a role in what's occurred in the schools? Going back, we look at, we found out only because the airplane almost crashed that Randy Weingart was sitting in Michael Bloomberg's airplane taking a flight to Ted Kennedy's funeral, which would appear on its face to be a clear conflict of interest in accepting a gift from somebody you're supposed to be negotiating with. But moreover, we've had teachers sitting in rubber rooms for 8 years, and the union has not taken any stance on it. The union has allowed ATR pool to exist, which means teachers move from week to week to week, purportedly teaching classes. So hasn't the union had a major role by not being an advocate for its members and the students in the collapse of the schools?
Yes. I will say, as a member of MORE, that we feel that the leadership of our union has not has basically turned, let me say this. I will say this personally, and it's why I am a member of MORE, that the leadership of the union has basically turned our union into a union that provides benefits. And that we pay our monthly check to the union, and we get our dental and eyeglass benefits, and that's about it. It's done more than that, our union, because we've lost the right to grieve letters in our file. Lost is not the right word. Our union leadership bargained away the rights to grieve letters in our file. Our leadership bargained away the rights to go to a step 2 grievance, so that which used to be in the district. So step 1 was in the school, step 2 used to be at the district, step 3 was at the central board. The union bargained away the right to a step 2 grievance. So now if you lose in your school, which you almost always do since you're grieving against your principal, you have to get the union to agree to take it to the board's level on a grievance. Our union has refused to fight for smaller class size, saying that it shouldn't be part of a contract. Our union leadership, and this I will say also, before she was in the plane with Michael Bloomberg, Randy Weingarten has sat on the Council of Foreign Relations. Council of Foreign Relations is the organization that put out the study with Joe Klein and Condoleezza Rice about education as a national security issue. That is who Randy Weingarten was, and I can, if you want to talk later about the role that Albert Shanker played in backing the CIA movements in Central and South America, we can talk about that. But that's yeah.
And she was never a teacher.
And she was a teacher, 1 class a day for 6 months. I'm sorry, 1, 2, 3.
A couple quickies.
Sure.
I just retired from 40 years at City University, both at Bronx Community College, City College, and Montefiore Hospital. My job for the last 20 years was the special assistant to the president of the college. What I was so concerned with was all not evaluating the teachers, evaluating the students. Here in the Bronx, only 40% of Black and Hispanic males graduate from high school. I don't care where they go with it, except for the Bronx high school science. Forget about it.
Yeah.
But what I've seen